My name is Lauren Michelle Carter. I was 32 years old the day my father stood up at my wedding reception, lifted his glass, smiled that tight, practiced smile he used for public humiliation, and said loud enough for everyone to hear, "This wedding is a disgrace to the Carter name." The room went silent. Forks froze midair. Someone's laugh died halfway through. My mother's face turned the color of wet paper. And my husband, my brand new husband, sat beside me, still holding my hand, unaware that the word plumber was about to be used like a knife. Because in that moment, my father wasn't just insulting the wedding. He was insulting the man I loved, the man he believed was beneath us, the man he thought I had married out of desperation or rebellion. He didn't know that just 6 weeks later, the same man he called an embarrassment would be standing on national television, helmet off, name flashing across the screen, while my father sat frozen in his leather chair, realizing too late that everything he thought he knew was wrong. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Before I tell you how my father went from calling my marriage a shame to pretending he had always supported it, let me ask you something. Have you ever been dismissed by the people who were supposed to love you the most? If you have, stay with me. And if you haven't, you might still recognize the silence I lived in for most of my life. And if this story touches something familiar, subscribe, like, and share your thoughts in the comments, because stories like this deserve to be heard. The wedding was supposed to be small. I wanted that from the beginning. Simple flowers, warm lights, people who actually knew us. But my father, Richard Carter, had other ideas. To him, appearances were oxygen. He was a respected man in our city, corporate consultant, Rotary Club president, church board member, the kind of man who shook hands firmly and smiled with his eyes just enough to make you trust him, the kind of man people assumed was kind simply because he was successful. Growing up, I learned early that love in our house came with conditions. My younger brother, Evan, was the golden child. He followed the plan: private college, finance degree, job arranged through one of Dad's connections. He spoke the language my father respected: numbers, titles, ambition. I spoke the language my father tolerated: emotions, questions, resistance. When I told my parents I wanted to study social work, my father said, "You're too smart to waste your life helping people who won't help themselves." When I moved into my own apartment at 24, he said, "You'll be back when reality hits." And when I introduced them to Daniel, he didn't even bother hiding the disappointment. Daniel, my husband, was a plumber. Not the caricature my father imagined, not lazy, not uneducated, not crude. He owned his own business, worked 6 days a week, employed 3 other men, and treated people with a kind of quiet respect I had never seen in my own home. But my father heard one word and stopped listening: plumber. The first time Daniel came to dinner, my father asked him what he really wanted to do one day. Daniel smiled politely and said, "This is what I want to do." That smile faded for just a second, so fast most people would have missed it, but I didn't. I saw it because I recognized it. It was the look of someone realizing they would never be enough for someone else's expectations. After that night, the comments started. Not directly, never directly. Lauren could have had so many opportunities. You're settling too young. Love doesn't pay bills. Daniel never complained. He never asked me to choose. He never defended himself unless asked. And somehow that made my father dislike him even more. When Daniel proposed, on a quiet evening in our kitchen, no cameras, no speeches, my father didn't congratulate us. He sighed, long and heavy, like I had just told him I was sick. "I hope you know what you're throwing away," he said. I did. I was throwing away approval and choosing peace. The wedding planning became a battlefield disguised as generosity. My parents insisted on paying, which I should have refused, but part of me still hoped, still wanted, still believed maybe this was the moment he would come around. Instead, every choice became a reminder of what he thought Daniel wasn't good enough for. The venue was too modest, the guest list too mixed, the food too casual, and Daniel, always Daniel, was spoken about like a phase I would eventually outgrow. The night before the wedding, I cried alone in the bathroom of my childhood home, staring at my reflection and wondering why the people who raised me made me feel so small on what was supposed to be the happiest day of my life. Daniel found me there. He didn't tell me to calm down. He didn't say everything would be fine. He just sat on the floor with me and said, "No matter what happens tomorrow, I choose you." That should have been enough to silence every doubt, but wounds like mine don't close that easily. The ceremony itself was beautiful, the kind of beautiful that feels real, not staged. When Daniel said his vows, his voice cracked, not from nerves, but from feeling. I saw people wipe their eyes. Even my mother smiled through tears. My father clapped politely. Then came the reception. I didn't know he planned to speak. It wasn't on the schedule. No one warned me. When he stood up, glass raised, people leaned in, expecting warmth, expecting pride. Instead, he cleared his throat and said, "I'll keep this brief." He talked about family legacy, about standards, about sacrifice. And then he looked straight at me, not Daniel, not the room, me. "This wedding," he said, pausing just long enough to let the words settle, "is not what I envisioned for my daughter, but I suppose we all make choices." My chest tightened, my fingers dug into Daniel's palm. He continued, "And while I wish them luck, I hope Lauren understands that marrying beneath your potential has consequences." The word plumber followed, sharp, casual, like a joke everyone was expected to laugh at. No one did. I felt heat rush to my face, humiliation crawling up my spine like ants. I waited for my mother to stand, for someone to interrupt, for the room to reject him. No one moved. Daniel stood up. Not angry, not loud, calm, respectful. He leaned down, kissed my forehead, and whispered, "I'll be right back." As he walked away, the room buzzed with whispers. My father sat down satisfied, as if he had restored order. I sat there alone, in my wedding dress, heart pounding, realizing something devastating and freeing at the same time. My father didn't just doubt my marriage. He had never believed in me. And as I watched Daniel disappear through the doors, I had no idea that this moment, the lowest point of my life, was quietly setting the stage for a truth my father would soon be forced to face in front of the entire country. But first, things were about to get much worse. Daniel was gone longer than I expected. At first, I told myself he just needed air, that he'd stepped outside to cool off, to protect me from saying something that would burn bridges forever. That was always Daniel, absorbing impact so others didn't have to. But as the minutes stretched, the room began to feel wrong, too loud in places it shouldn't have been, too quiet where comfort should have filled the gaps. I could feel eyes sliding toward me, then away again, like people didn't know whether to pity me or pretend nothing had happened. My mother leaned in and whispered, "Just ignore him. You know how your father gets." How he gets. As if cruelty were a weather pattern, sudden, unavoidable, no one's fault. I nodded because that's what I'd been trained to do, minimize my own pain so others didn't have to feel uncomfortable. But my throat burned, and my chest felt hollow, like something essential had been scooped out in front of everyone I loved. Across the room, my father laughed with one of his business friends. Laughed, as if he hadn't just humiliated his daughter on the one day she was supposed to feel cherished. I stood up, not dramatically, not with tears streaming down my face. I smoothed my dress, took a breath, and followed the path Daniel had taken moments earlier. Every step felt heavier than the last, like I was walking through water. Outside, the evening air was cool, carrying the faint smell of cut grass and spilled champagne. I spotted Daniel near the far edge of the parking lot, his back turned, phone pressed to his ear. He wasn't crying, he wasn't pacing, he was listening. When he saw me, he ended the call immediately. "I'm sorry," I said, the words tumbling out before I could stop them. "I'm so sorry. I didn't know he would—" "Lauren," he said gently, stepping closer. "Stop." His eyes weren't angry. That almost hurt more. "This isn't on you. And it's not the first time someone's looked down on me. It just hurts more when it comes from your family. I nodded, tears finally breaking free. I should have protected you. I should have shut him down. He took my hands. You don't owe anyone a performance, not even him. I wanted to believe that. I really did. But years of trying to earn my father's approval had wired something deep inside me. This reflex to fix, to smooth, to apologize for taking up space. "What were you doing on the phone?" I asked quietly. Daniel hesitated. That was new. "It was work," he said. "Something came up. On our wedding night." I searched his face, suddenly aware of how little I knew about what Daniel carried quietly. He was private, yes, but never secretive. And in that pause, something shifted. "Is everything okay?" He smiled again, but it didn't quite reach his eyes. "It will be." Before I could press further, my mother appeared in the doorway, her expression tight with concern. "Lawrence, sweetheart, people are starting to ask questions. You should come back inside." People. Always people. Daniel squeezed my hands once more. "Go, I'll be right behind you." I watched him for a second longer than necessary, then turned back toward the noise and lights and expectations. As I stepped inside, I felt it again, that familiar sensation of standing alone in a crowded room. The rest of the reception passed like a blur. Cake was cut, music played, photos were taken, smiles were pasted on and held in place by sheer will. My father avoided me entirely, which somehow felt worse than the speech. Later, as guests began to leave, my brother Evan approached me near the gift table. "That was rough," he said, not meeting my eyes. "You think?" I replied. He shrugged. "You know, Dad, he just wants what's best for you." I laughed, sharp and humorless. "No, he wants what makes him look best." Evan shifted uncomfortably. "Still, maybe Daniel could have chosen something more stable?" I stared at my brother, suddenly seeing him clearly, not as the boy I'd protected growing up, but as a man who had benefited too much from the system to question it. "Stable?" I repeated. "Daniel built his business from nothing. He employs people. He shows up. He loves me. If that's not stable, what is?" Evan said nothing. When the last guest left and the staff began clearing tables, I finally exhaled. My feet ached. My face hurt from smiling. All I wanted was to leave, to be alone with my husband, to remember why this day mattered at all. But Daniel was gone again. His jacket was missing. His phone went straight to voicemail. Panic crept in slowly, then all at once. I checked the parking lot. Empty. I asked my mother if she'd seen him. She hadn't. My father was already gone, left early, of course, as if he'd done nothing wrong. I sat on the edge of a chair in my wedding dress, surrounded by half-melted candles and discarded napkins, wondering if this was some kind of sign, if the universe was trying to tell me something I'd been too stubborn to see. 20 minutes later, my phone buzzed. "Daniel, I'm so sorry. I'll explain everything. Please don't be scared." That didn't help. When he finally returned, it was nearly an hour later. His shirt was wrinkled, his hair windblown, his expression a mix of exhaustion and urgency. "Talk to me," I said immediately. He took a deep breath. "I didn't want to tell you yet. I wanted today to be about us." "Tell me what?" He looked around the empty hall, then back at me. "There's something happening with work, something big, bigger than anything I've ever done." My heart raced. What kind of something big? Before he could answer, my phone buzzed again, this time with a notification from a news app I barely used. "Local hero Plumber assists in major infrastructure failure. Story developing." I looked up at Daniel slowly. "What is this?" I asked. He swallowed. I was called in as part of an emergency response team. What happened tonight, it's connected to something much larger, and it's not going to stay local. The room felt suddenly too small. Are you saying this is going to be on the news? I asked. Not just the news, he replied quietly. Lauren, this is going national. I thought of my father's words. A disgrace. I thought of the laughter, the silence, the way he'd said plumber like it explained everything. And for the first time that night, something inside me shifted. Not pain, not shame, but anticipation. Because if Daniel was right, then the story my father thought he was telling was about to be rewritten. And this time, the whole country would be watching. I didn't sleep that night. Not in the way people mean when they say they didn't sleep. I lay beside Daniel in the hotel room, still in my wedding night glow turned emotional wreckage, staring at the ceiling while his breathing rose and fell beside me. Every time I closed my eyes, my father's voice replayed itself, a disgrace to the Carter name, over and over, like a broken recording that refused to stop. Daniel had fallen asleep almost immediately, exhaustion finally winning. That alone told me how much he'd been carrying. His phone lay face down on the nightstand. It buzzed once around 2 a.m. He didn't stir. I did. I didn't touch it, not because I didn't want to know, but because I was afraid of what knowing might change. Fear has a funny way of disguising itself as respect. Morning came quietly, too quietly for a day that was supposed to start a marriage. The sunlight slipped through the curtains, gentle and unaware of the chaos waiting just outside the room. Daniel woke up before I did, or at least pretended to. Hey, he said softly, brushing a thumb along my arm. You okay? I turned to face him. He looked tired but calm, centered, like someone who knew exactly where he was headed, even if the road was about to get rough. You promised to explain, I said. He nodded, sat up, took a breath. You remember the city contract I told you about last year? He asked. The one you didn't get? I did get it, he corrected gently, just not officially. I frowned. What does that mean? It means when something breaks that no one wants to talk about, old pipelines, pressure systems, structural failures, they call people like me, quietly, no paperwork, no publicity. My stomach tightened. Daniel? Nothing illegal, he said quickly, just inconvenience for the people in charge. He told me then about the aging water infrastructure beneath several major cities, about how shortcuts had been taken years ago, about how a failure the night before, our wedding night, could have poisoned thousands if it hadn't been caught in time. And you? I asked. I was part of the team that shut it down, he said. I didn't just fix a pipe, Lauren. I stopped a chain reaction. I sat there, stunned. And now? I whispered. And now someone leaked it, he said, which means it's no longer just a repair job. It's a story. As if on cue, his phone buzzed again. This time he picked it up. He didn't smile. He didn't frown. He just closed his eyes briefly, like a man bracing for impact. It's already trending, he said. By noon, it was everywhere. Local news first, then national. Headlines talking about a skilled tradesman, an independent contractor, a key figure in preventing a public safety disaster. They used phrases like quiet hero, an unseen backbone of the city. They used his name, Daniel Reyes. My phone lit up with messages, friends, old classmates, even distant relatives who hadn't spoken to me in years. Isn't that your husband? Your Daniel? Wow, didn't see that coming. Neither had my father. The first call came from my mother. Lauren, your father wants to talk to you. I laughed before I could stop myself. It came out bitter and sharp. No, I said. Please, she insisted. He didn't know. If he had known, he knew enough, I replied. He knew who Daniel was. He just didn't respect it. There was a pause on the line, then quieter. This is blowing up. People from church have been calling, his colleagues, they're asking questions. I imagined my father's world cracking, not because he'd hurt me, but because his image was under threat. "Tell him I'm busy," I said. "I just got married." I hung up before she could respond. By evening, a major network had reached out. They wanted Daniel for an interview, prime time, a full segment. "They want to fly us out," Daniel said, almost disbelieving. Us. That word mattered. We packed in silence, not tense silence, focused silence, the kind of feels like standing at the edge of something irreversible. On the plane, Daniel finally asked the question he'd been holding back. "Are you okay with this? With being seen? With your family seeing?" I thought of my father's face at the reception, the way he'd spoken like a judge delivering a sentence. "I'm not afraid of being seen. I'm afraid of going back to pretending." He reached for my hand. That night in a hotel room overlooking a city that buzzed with motion and indifference, I watched Daniel rehearse answers, not to impress, not to defend himself, but to tell the truth simply, honestly, without ego. And I realized something that made my chest ache. My father had spent his life chasing respect. Daniel had earned it without trying. The interview aired the next evening. I sat off camera, heart pounding, as the host leaned forward and asked, "Do you consider yourself a hero?" Daniel shook his head. "No, I consider myself good at my job and proud of it." The clip went viral. And somewhere in a quiet living room filled with awards and polished furniture, my father watched the world applaud the man he'd publicly shamed. My phone buzzed again. "Dad, we need to talk." I stared at the message for a long time. Then I turned the phone face down, because for the first time in my life, I wasn't sure he deserved a response. And just as I began to feel powerful in that choice, another message came in, this one from a number I didn't recognize. Unknown. "Lauren, there's something you need to know about your father and about the night of your wedding." My heart dropped. Whatever was coming next, it wasn't over yet. I stared at the message until the words blurred. "There's something you need to know about your father and about the night of your wedding." I didn't reply right away. I'd learned the hard way that not every truth arrives gently, and some, once opened, can't be closed again. Daniel was in the shower, the sound of running water filling the hotel room, steady and grounding. For a moment, I considered waiting, protecting this fragile bubble of peace we'd finally found. But the past doesn't wait for permission. I typed back one word. "Who is this?" The response came almost immediately. "Unknown. My name is Marissa Hale. I used to work for your father." My pulse quickened. I knew that name. Marissa had been my father's executive assistant for nearly a decade. Efficient, invisible, loyal. She'd attended company dinners, charity galas, even a few holidays when staff was encouraged to be present. Then one day, she was gone. No explanation, no farewell. I always assumed she'd moved on. Apparently, she hadn't just moved. Me. What does this have to do with my wedding? There was a pause, long enough for Daniel to step out of the bathroom, towel around his waist, concern flickering across his face as he noticed mine. "What's wrong?" he asked. "I don't know yet," I said honestly. My phone buzzed again. "Marissa, your father made a call that night, right after the reception, and it wasn't about you." My chest tightened. Daniel sat beside me, instinctively close. "What is it?" he asked again. I swallowed. "Someone who used to work for my dad says he made a call the night of our wedding about something big." Daniel's jaw tightened slightly. Not fear, not anger, awareness. "Lauren," he said carefully, "there are some people who didn't want that story to come out. The infrastructure failure, the shortcuts, the cover-ups." My heart skipped. You think my father knows people," Daniel said, "and some of them benefit from things staying quiet." The phone buzzed again. "Marissa, he tried to stop the story. Not directly. He used connections, pressure. He didn't expect it to blow up anyway. My hands were shaking now. Me. Why are you telling me this? The typing dots appeared, disappeared, appeared again. Marissa. Because he blamed you when it failed. Said if you hadn't married that plumber, none of this would be touching him. I felt something inside me crack. Not loudly, but completely. Daniel took the phone from my hands gently, reading the messages. His face didn't change much, but his grip tightened just enough for me to notice. He tried to bury it, I whispered. And when he couldn't, he blamed me. Daniel handed the phone back. This is who he is, Lauren. Not because of you, not because of me. I nodded, but the little girl in me, the one who'd waited her whole life for approval, was finally grieving what she'd never had. The next morning, my father showed up, unannounced. I opened the hotel room door to find him standing there in a tailored suit that suddenly looked too stiff, too rehearsed. The confident posture was there, but the ease was gone. His smile didn't quite land. "Lauren," he said, "can we talk?" Daniel stepped beside me, close but silent, present without taking over. Always. My father's eyes flicked to him, then back at me. "I won't be long," he added. I stepped into the hallway and closed the door behind me. "What do you want?" I asked. He sighed, rubbing his temples. "This situation has gotten out of hand." I almost laughed. "You humiliated me at my wedding, and now you're worried about your situation?" "I didn't know," he snapped, then caught himself. "I didn't know what he was involved in." "That's the point. You didn't care to know." He shifted, lowering his voice. "People are asking questions. They're connecting dots. This interview, this attention, it's dangerous." "For who?" I asked. "For everyone," he said quickly. "For you too." I met his eyes. "Did you try to stop the story?" Silence. A flicker of something, maybe anger, passed across his face. "I made calls," he admitted, "to protect my family." "No," I said calmly. "You made calls to protect yourself." He scoffed. "You don't understand how things work." "I understand exactly how they work. You measure worth by status, by control, and when you lost control, you lashed out." He stepped closer. "Lauren, listen to me. This man, your husband, he's putting you in the spotlight. You're not built for this." Something inside me settled then, like a puzzle piece clicking into place. I've been in the spotlight my whole life. I just finally chose who I stand beside in it. He stared at me, searching for the daughter who used to shrink under his gaze. She wasn't there anymore. "Come home," he said, softer now. "Let this blow over. We can fix this." I shook my head. "You can't fix what you won't own." I turned to leave. "Lauren," he called after me, "if you walk away now, don't expect things to go back to the way they were." I paused, then looked back at him. "They already never will." I went back into the room and locked the door behind me. Daniel wrapped his arms around me, steady and warm. "Are you okay?" he asked. I exhaled. "I think I finally am." But healing is rarely linear. That afternoon, a producer called again. They wanted a follow-up segment. This time, not just Daniel. They wanted us. Our story, our wedding, the speech. I felt the weight of it then. The choice. Stay quiet, keep the peace, or speak and let the truth land where it may. I looked at Daniel. He didn't push. He never did. "What do you want?" he asked. I thought of my father's voice, my mother's silence, my brother's excuses, and the woman I was becoming. "I want to tell the truth, all of it." Daniel nodded once. "Then I'm with you." That night, as the city lights flickered out our window, my phone buzzed one last time. A voicemail. From my mother. Her voice was shaking. "Lauren, your father's board is meeting. They found something from years ago. I don't know what's going to happen." I closed my eyes. The truth had a way of surfacing, no matter how deep it was buried, and soon the man who had called my marriage a disgrace would be facing a reckoning far bigger than my wedding ever was. The studio lights were brighter than I expected. Not harsh, just unforgiving. The kind of light that doesn't allow you to hide behind angles or posture. Every emotion shows up whether you invite it or not. I sat beside Daniel on a long gray couch, my hands folded in my lap, my wedding ring catching the light every time I shifted. Across from us, the host smiled kindly, the way people do when they already know the weight of what they're about to ask. "Lauren," she said gently, "this story captured the nation because it's not just about infrastructure or heroism. It's about class, dignity, and how we define worth. Why did you decide to speak now?" I felt my throat tighten. For a split second, I saw my father's face again, calm, superior, convinced he was right. I saw my mother's silence, my brother's shrug, years of swallowing words so the room would stay comfortable. Then I inhaled. "Because silence protected the wrong people for too long," I said, "and because love shouldn't come with shame attached." Daniel's hand found mine, not to anchor me, but to stand with me. I told them about the wedding, not dramatically, just honestly, about how my father's words didn't just hurt me, they tried to erase the man I chose. I spoke about how Daniel had spent his life fixing things others didn't want to look at. Pipes, systems, problems buried underground, how society praises the visible but depends on the unseen. I didn't mention my father's name. I didn't need to. The host nodded slowly. "And how did it feel," she asked, "watching the world celebrate the very thing your family dismissed?" I paused. "It felt like relief," I said finally, "and grief. Relief that the truth was undeniable, grief that it took public validation for some people to see what I'd known all along." The segment aired that night. The response was immediate and overwhelming. Messages poured in from strangers who saw their own stories reflected in mine. Women who'd married men their families looked down on, men whose hands were calloused from honest work and treated like a flaw instead of a badge, parents who apologized too late, parents who never did. But not all responses were kind. By morning, the headlines had shifted. Corporate connections questioned an infrastructure scandal. Board opens review into consultant ties. Wedding speech clip resurfaces as context emerges. The clip of my father's speech, recorded by a guest and once shared quietly in family group chats, was now everywhere. This time, no one was laughing. My phone rang, again and again. Calls I didn't answer, voicemails I didn't open, until one came through that made my chest ache before I even picked up. It was my brother. "Lauren," Evan said, his voice tight, "you need to come home." "I am home," I replied, "where I chose to be." "This isn't about you choosing Daniel," he snapped. "It's about Dad. He's in trouble." I closed my eyes. "What kind of trouble?" "He suspended him," Evan said, "pending investigation." The words settled slowly. Suspended. My father, the man who controlled every room he entered, was suddenly powerless. "They found emails," Evan said. "Old ones, connections, pressure. It's bad." I said nothing. "Lauren," he said again, softer now, "they're saying you set him up." That hurt more than I expected. "I told the truth," I replied. "If the truth exposes him, that's not my doing." "He's not well," Evan said. "He hasn't been eating. He keeps saying you betrayed him." A familiar guilt stirred, automatic, conditioned. Then I thought of Daniel standing in that reception hall, dignity intact, while my father tried to make himself feel taller by pushing someone else down. "No," I said quietly. "He betrayed me long before this." There was a long silence. "You're really not coming back, are you?" Evan asked. "No," I said. "I'm done begging to be chosen." When the call ended, I sat still for a long time. Daniel found me there, staring out the window. "Bad news?" he asked. "Complicated news," I replied. He sat beside me, waited. "They're blaming me," I said, saying I exposed him, that I did this. Daniel didn't hesitate. "You didn't do anything except refuse to lie." I leaned into him, feeling the steady rise and fall of his chest. For the first time, I allowed myself to feel something dangerous. Peace. But peace, I was learning, often arrives just before the storm you can't avoid. That afternoon, my mother called. Not crying, not apologetic, resolved. "Lauren, your father wants to apologize." I almost laughed. "He wants to apologize, but he needs you to understand the pressure he was under, the sacrifices he made." I straightened. "No," I said calmly. "An apology that explains itself is not an apology. It's a defense." She exhaled sharply. "You've changed." "Yes," I said. "I finally did." She was quiet for a moment. "They're talking about charges," she whispered. "If this goes any further—" I stopped her. "I love you, but I won't carry this for him." When the call ended, Daniel looked at me with quiet pride. "That was hard," he said. "It was necessary," I replied. That evening, another message arrived, this time from Marissa. "Marissa, they're reopening my case too. Wrongful termination, retaliation. I'm testifying." I stared at the screen. Everything buried was coming up at once. And then one final notification. A request from Richard Carter. I didn't open it. Not yet. Because sometimes the most powerful boundary is deciding when someone no longer gets immediate access to you. And as the city outside buzzed on, indifferent and alive, I realized the next conversation with my father would change everything, whether it happened or not. I didn't respond to my father's request that night. Not because I didn't see it, not because I was afraid of what he might say, but because for the first time in my life, I was choosing the timing, not reacting to his. That alone felt revolutionary. Daniel noticed. "You don't have to read it," he said gently as I set my phone face down on the table between us. "I know," I replied, "but I will. Just not yet." He nodded, the way he always did, without judgment, without urgency, loving me in a way that didn't require immediate resolution. The next morning, the fallout became impossible to ignore. My father's face was everywhere. News panels debated ethical responsibility. Commentators replayed the wedding speech, now framed not as a strict father's concern, but as a man revealing his values out loud, values rooted in hierarchy, control, and quiet contempt. The word plumber echoed differently now, not as an insult, as irony. I watched one clip where a commentator said, "Perhaps the most telling part of this story isn't the infrastructure failure, but the way dignity was assigned based on profession." I turned off the TV. Daniel came home later that afternoon with a strange expression, half disbelief, half concern. "They want me back on air," he said. "Another interview, this time about class." I smiled faintly. "Of course they do. But that's not why I'm worried," he added. My chest tightened. "What is it?" He hesitated. "Someone leaked internal emails from your father's office." I felt the air leave my lungs. "They show he tried to block funding inspections years ago," Daniel continued. "The same infrastructure that failed. Lauren, people could have been hurt." The weight of it settled heavy and sharp. This wasn't just about pride anymore. This wasn't about a wedding speech or public humiliation. This was about harm avoided by chance. That evening, I finally opened my father's message. It was long, carefully written, polished. "Lauren, I never intended to hurt you. Everything I've done was to protect this family. I see now that my words came out wrong, but you must understand the pressure I was under. I hope we can speak privately and resolve this before it goes any further." No apology, no accountability, just control, still reaching. I felt strangely calm. I typed back, "I'm willing to talk, but not privately, and not without Daniel." The response came faster than I expected. "This is between you and me." I stared at the screen, then replied, "That's the problem. It always has been." We met 2 days later. Neutral ground, a quiet conference room at a hotel halfway between our worlds. Glass walls, neutral colors, no family photos, no legacy to hide behind. My father arrived early. I arrived with Daniel. He looked older, smaller somehow. The certainty he'd worn like armor had cracks now. But when his eyes landed on Daniel, something familiar flashed there, resentment mixed with fear. "This isn't necessary," my father said, gesturing toward Daniel. "We can speak freely." "No," I replied, sitting down. "We'll speak honestly." Silence stretched. Finally, my father sighed. "You've embarrassed this family." I didn't flinch. "You embarrassed yourself. I just stopped covering for it." He leaned forward. "You don't understand what I built. I understand what you protected and who you didn't." Daniel remained quiet, present, watching. "You've always been sensitive," my father continued. "You take things personally." I laughed softly. "You insulted my husband in front of 200 people. That wasn't sensitivity, that was clarity." His jaw tightened. "If you'd married differently." I cut him off. "If I'd married someone you could brag about? Someone you could use?" He slammed his hand on the table. "I wanted better for you." "No," I said evenly. "You wanted better from me." The room fell quiet. Then something unexpected happened. My father's voice dropped. "They're talking about charges," he said. "If this continues, everything I've worked for could be destroyed." I studied him. Not as a daughter desperate for love, but as a woman seeing a man clearly. "Then tell the truth," I said. "All of it." He shook his head. "You don't understand how this works." "I do," I replied. "Silence protects power. Truth threatens it." He looked at Daniel then. Really looked. "You," he said, voice tight, "are the reason my life is falling apart." Daniel finally spoke. "No," he said calmly. "I'm the reason the pipes didn't poison a city." My father's face drained of color. For the first time, he had nothing to say. I stood. "I'm not here to negotiate. I'm here to set boundaries." He looked up at me, eyes sharp. "If you walk away now—" "I know," I said softly. "You already warned me." I turned to leave. "Lauren," his voice cracked just enough to sound real. "I'm your father." I paused. "And I was your daughter. You just didn't like who I became." We left. Outside, the air felt lighter, cleaner. Daniel exhaled slowly. "Are you okay?" "I know," I softly. "I think I just ended a chapter that never loved me back." The next week, the charges became official. My father resigned. Not publicly, quietly, strategically, but the damage was done. The image he'd protected collapsed under the weight of his own choices. My mother sent one final message. "I wish things had been different." So did I, but not enough to go back. That night, Daniel and I sat on our balcony, city lights flickering below. No cameras, no interviews, just us. "I'm proud of you," he said. I leaned against him. "For a long time, I thought love was something you earned. And now?" he asked. "Now I know it's something you protect." My phone buzzed one last time. A message from Marisa. "They're settling. I'm free. Thank you for telling the truth." I smiled. Not because I'd won, but because I'd stopped losing myself. And still, one final chapter remained. Because healing doesn't end when the noise stops. It begins when you decide who gets access to the quiet. When the noise finally died down, I expected relief. What I got instead was silence so loud it scared me. No cameras outside the building, no reporters calling Daniel's phone every hour, no new headlines refreshing every time I opened my browser. The world had already moved on to the next scandal, the next outrage, the next convenient villain. And there I was, 32, newly married, estranged from my father, emotionally exhausted, and standing in the quiet aftermath of a life that had just cracked open. It turns out healing doesn't arrive with applause. It arrives when everything stops. Daniel and I moved into a small townhouse on the edge of the city. Nothing flashy, brick exterior, tiny balcony, the kind of place my father would have dismissed as temporary. But to me, it felt permanent in the way peace does. The first few weeks were strange. We cooked simple meals, folded laundry together, watched bad TV late at night. Ordinary moments that felt almost sacred after so much emotional chaos. But grief is sneaky. It doesn't always come as sadness. Sometimes it comes as emptiness. I'd catch myself reaching for my phone to tell my mother something small, then remember she no longer knew how to show up without filtering everything through my father. I'd hear Daniel on the phone with one of his workers and feel pride swell in my chest, followed immediately by anger that my own father had never looked at me that way. One afternoon, while unpacking the last box from my childhood home, I found an old photo album. Me at 7, smiling, gap-toothed, holding a ribbon from a school play. Me at 14, standing stiff beside my father at a charity event, already learning how to shrink. Me at 22, graduation day, my smile forced, my eyes searching the crowd for approval that never landed. I sat on the floor and cried, not because I missed my father, but because I finally accepted that I'd never had the father I kept hoping he'd become. Daniel found me there, sitting among memories that felt heavier than furniture. "You don't have to explain," he said softly, sitting beside me. "I feel ridiculous," I admitted. He hurt me over and over, and part of me still wants him to see me. Daniel was quiet for a moment. Wanting love doesn't make you weak, it just means you're human. That night, I made my first therapy appointment. It felt strange saying it out loud, like admitting defeat. But what I learned quickly was that therapy wasn't about fixing me, it was about unlearning. Unlearning the reflex to apologize for other people's behavior. Unlearning the belief that love had to be earned through compliance. Unlearning the idea that setting boundaries made me cruel. Session by session, I began to see patterns clearly. My father didn't just shame my husband, he'd been shaming me my entire life, quietly, strategically, whenever I stepped outside the role he designed. The wedding speech wasn't an accident, it was consistency. Meanwhile, Daniel's world shifted too. The attention faded, but the respect remained. His business grew, not because of fame, but because people trusted him. City contracts came in officially this time, transparent, documented. One evening, he came home holding an envelope. "They offered me a long-term consultancy, advisory level," he said. I smiled. "Look at you, Mr. Just a Plumber." He laughed, shaking his head. "You know what's funny?" "What?" I asked. "They respect me now because they have to, not because I changed, but because they finally looked." That landed deep. A month later, my mother asked to see me, alone. We met at a cafe I'd loved as a teenager, neutral territory, safe distance. She looked tired, older, smaller than I remembered. "I should have protected you," she said after a long pause. I didn't rush to comfort her. "I know," I replied. She winced slightly, but nodded. "I know that, too." Tears filled her eyes. "Do you think we could still have a relationship?" I considered it carefully. "I want one," said I slowly, "but not if it requires me pretending nothing happened." She nodded again, more firmly this time. "I understand." It wasn't forgiveness, it was a beginning with conditions. That night, after dinner, I stood on our balcony watching the city breathe below us. Cars moved, lights flickered, people lived entire lives without knowing my name, my story, my pain. And for the first time, that felt freeing. Daniel joined me, wrapping an arm around my shoulders. "You okay?" he asked. "I think so," I said. "I'm just realizing something." "What's that?" "My father spent his whole life building an image and lost everything protecting it." He waited. "My whole life I tried to fit into that image and gained everything the moment I walked away." I rested my head against his chest. The next morning, a letter arrived. No return address, just handwriting I recognized immediately. My father. My hands didn't shake this time. I opened it. And as I read the first line, I realized something important. This wasn't going to be an apology. It was going to be a last attempt at control, and how I responded would determine whether the cycle ended with me. I didn't open my father's letter right away. I placed it on the kitchen counter and walked away from it like it was something alive, something that could still reach out and pull me back into a version of myself I had already buried. Daniel watched me quietly, saying nothing, trusting me to decide when and if I was ready. That trust mattered more than he knew. When I finally sat down and unfolded the paper, the handwriting was exactly how I remembered it. Precise, controlled, no wasted space. Even his apologies, I'd learned, came with structure. Lauren, I won't pretend to understand your choices, but I do regret how things ended. Families endure because they compromise. I hope, in time, you'll remember everything I provided and reconsider the distance you've chosen. Pride goes both ways. I read it twice, then a third time, and with each pass, something became clearer. There was no, "I'm sorry," no, "I hurt you," no, "I was wrong." Just a reminder of what he'd given me and an accusation for what I'd taken away. I folded the letter carefully and slid it back into the envelope. Not out of anger, out of acceptance. Daniel came up behind me, resting his hands lightly on my shoulders. "Do you want to talk about it?" I said, "He hasn't changed," I said simply. Daniel nodded. "That's an answer too." I realized then that closure isn't something someone else gives you. It's something you grant yourself when you stop waiting for the version of a person that never existed. I didn't respond to the letter, and for the first time, that silence didn't feel like punishment. It felt like peace. Weeks turned into months. Life softened around the edges. Therapy continued. My relationship with my mother grew slowly, carefully, built on honesty instead of denial. Some days were easy, some were heavy, but they were real. Daniel thrived, not loudly, not boastfully, just steadily, the same way he always had. One evening after dinner, he handed me his phone. "Look at this," he said. It was a short clip from a local school career day. Daniel stood in front of a group of teenagers, holding up a diagram of a water system. He wasn't on a stage, no suit, no applause, just explaining how things worked and why the work mattered. A kid in the background said, "That's actually kind of cool." Daniel smiled in the video. Not proud, not defensive, just grounded. My chest tightened. "That," I said softly, "is who you've always been." He shrugged. "I just fix what needs fixing." I thought about my father then, about how he spent his life avoiding cracks instead of repairing them, about how he believed appearances mattered more than function, and how, in the end, it was a man who worked underground who saved lives, while the man on top watched everything collapse. One afternoon, while walking through the neighborhood, a woman stopped me. "You're Lauren, right?" she asked hesitantly. I braced myself. "I just wanted to say thank you," she continued. "My husband's a mechanic. My family never took him seriously. Your story helped me stand up for him." I smiled. "I'm glad." As she walked away, something settled inside me. My pain hadn't been meaningless. It had become a bridge. Months later, I heard through Evan that my father had moved, downsized. Fewer invitations, fewer rooms where his voice carried authority. The world hadn't ended for him, but it had changed. I felt no joy in that, just distance. On our first anniversary, Daniel and I returned to the same city where everything had unraveled, not to relive it, but to reclaim it. We stood outside the venue where my father had spoken those words, where I felt small, where shame had tried to root itself in my memory. Daniel took my hand. "Any regrets?" he asked. I looked around. The building seemed smaller now. "Only that I waited so long to choose myself," I said. He smiled. "You chose us." That night, sitting on our balcony again, city lights glowing beneath us, I thought about the girl I'd been, The one who thought love meant endurance. The woman I was now knew better. Love isn't humiliation dressed as concern. Love isn't silence in the face of cruelty. Love doesn't ask you to disappear to be accepted. My father called my wedding a disgrace, but what he really meant was that it didn't serve him. And when my so-called plumber husband stood on national television, not seeking praise, not chasing status, he exposed something far bigger than broken pipes. He exposed the lie that worth is measured by titles instead of integrity. I didn't need my father's approval anymore. I had something better. A life built on respect, a marriage built on partnership, and the courage to walk away from anyone who tried to make me smaller. So let me ask you, have you ever been underestimated because of who you loved or who you chose to become? And what did it cost you to finally stand your ground? Share your story in the comments.